And Keith, salmonella typically is associated with animal or human feces. How do you think these cantaloupes might have gotten contaminated?
Well, certainly back 20 years ago, we used to have an outbreak of salmonella and cantaloupes nearly every year. And back then, the kind of scenario was that the field used to grow the cantaloupes got contaminated with salmonella, be it animal intrusion, be it the compost that they put on the ground. Like some growers even put raw manure on the ground. And because cantaloupes grow on the ground, they're in close contact, and cantaloupes especially because of the sort of netting surface, they kind of accumulate this dirt with the salmonella, and salmonella is so good at surviving in the environment that when they're harvested, they go to the processing plant. They're kind of washed briefly to obviously get rid of the soil, but what that does is just spread the salmonella to other cantaloupes. Then we get them and we cut through the cantaloupe, taking the salmonella from the surface into the sort of flesh, which is a very good medium for growing salmonella. And that's the classic way it happened. And I would imagine that's the classic way it happened this time round.
So the warning here is associated with both pre-cut and whole cantaloupes. When we're out shopping, whether it's for cantaloupes or other fruit, what advice do you have for us?
Well, certainly when you're buying pre-cut, you're always going to take a risk. Even before this outbreak, pre-cut is where they're kind of cutting through the fruit and there might be cross-contamination with other fruit. And the thing is, you don't know where the fruit's been. Yeah, basically what they use the melons for in that cut is usually melons that are nearly towards the end of their best before date. So you always want, if you can, I know it's convenient to have pre-cut, but the best option is to actually use whole lemons. And there's two reasons for that. One is that obviously they haven't been cut yet, so they haven't, the salmonella, if it's there, hasn't been introduced into the flesh and they haven't been held for a certain amount of time. But the other thing, you look for the country of origin. In this case, for example, they're really just persuading people not to consume cantaloupes from Mexico, where they think they originated from. Most of those should be off the shelf now, but when it comes to pre-cut, there's no label at all to tell you where it is. So definitely whole is a good option for a lot of fresh produce, not just melons in this case.
And if I bring those melons home that are whole, not pre-cut, and is there a way that I can, I don't know, wash them and cut them at home that brings the risk down to zero?
I wish there was. You know, I hear the sort of suggestion that you can put them in the sink, get some washing up liquid, give them a good scrub. But the reality is that they're very hard to remove. And certainly I wouldn't risk, if I thought the melon or cantaloupe was contaminated, it was from contaminated batch, I wouldn't even try to wash it for the simple reason washing doesn't do anything. So you have to be cautious. And the trouble with fresh produce at the best of times is what happens in the field or the processing plant lands on our plate, regardless of what we do. And that's the same for a lot of fresh produce. Now, there is obviously virtual washing cantaloupes and for pesticide residues, but even then it's not that effective.
We've all heard of Craigslist. Well, now we want to hear Keith's list. We asked you to identify kind of 5 food items, the top 5 that might surprise us that are susceptible to salmonella.
Well, you know, certainly we know about the meat and the eggs, but salmonella gets around a lot of places. If I had to just focus on fresh produce, then certainly cantaloupe is up there. Mango, again, this sort of low acid fruit. Tomatoes that have had a good sort of run because back 20 years ago we used to have an outbreak every year. There's actually an outbreak going on in Italy with salmonella and tomatoes. And then you get into things like sprouted seeds, which have always been notoriously associated with it, and even honeydew melons. I think the only one I can recall that hasn't been implicated is the watermelon, you know, due to its smooth surface. So if I had to have a 5 list of fresh produce, they would be the 5.
So, Keith, you were saying at one point there were lots of salmonella outbreaks with cantaloupe, fewer now. Why is that?
So what we basically have is good practices on the farm. You know, don't put raw manure on the field. Make sure it's composted. So that's one aspect. The industry tidying up its act. The other aspect, though, is our diagnostics have got much more sensitive. But even in this case, with all the fingerprinting and sequencing, it took them about a month to detect the outbreak. So it can look like it's coming back and we're going to have another cantaloupe outbreak. But essentially, the industry has got better, but obviously not perfect.
One last quick question. If you invite me over for dinner sometime, any chance you'll serve cantaloupe?
I haven't served cantaloupe for the last 15 years, so I think the chances are good that it won't be there.
All right, Keith, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Keith Warriner, professor at the Department of Food Science at the University of Guelph.